Dear learners, today in this session we are going to talk on loss of biodiversity, causes and consequences. As you know, this is part of our course Ecosystem and Natural Resources and block 1. We have looked into the basic concept of all those biodiversity, how it was evolved. In the same time, we know that biodiversity is declining day by day. So we need to understand what are the major factors or reasons behind the loss of biodiversity across the globe. And we know a number of reasons, or we can say factors, that are responsible for this fast depleting biodiversity of our planet Earth. Some of the potential threats to this biodiversity includes, the fragmentation of habitats, because habitat is one of the important, unit or place where a species lives. Then the declines in size and the quality of habitat is also one of the potential threats that species means biodiversity. Introduction of exotic species, uncontrolled exploitation of hunting of certain species which are highly important, highly valuable to us. These are also some of the potential threats. Pollution, including nutrient loading, that is largely due to industrial development in different ecosystems. These are some of the major potential threats to biodiversity. When we look into the broad region of fragmentation, decline in size and quality of habitat, all this fragmentation or declines in size and quality of habitat is because of the construction of different dams or building of dams, different irrigation projects, other development and activities that disrupt the integrity of habitat and threatens to the species diversity, as we call biodiversity in that area. In the same time, we know that this construction of dams, irrigation projects, all these development activities, they bring great benefits to humanity, but that also come with significant cost to the species and ecosystems in that area. It is undeniable fact that habitat destruction causes different numbers of extinction in different places across the world. For example, when we talk about or in context of terrestrial that species, you will find that the declines in size and the quality of habitat, which are principally arise from conversion of forest and grassland to agriculture, conversion of natural forest to monoculture plantation, like we were talking about tea plantation, coffee plantation, and conversion of natural areas to urban settlement. These changes are largely induced by increasing demand for agricultural production, then grazing of animals, and we are cutting wood for our fuel and timber, and accommodating the increasing human population in the face of the earth. Again, when we talk about the fragmentation, this fragmentation raises the extinction risks, because when you isolate it, fragmentation means you fragmented a habitat, a large habitat, it isolated subpopulation. Okay. This isolation of subpopulation can go extinct one by one, because it will not be able to repopulate it. It is small and that fragmented environment place. So this stochastic declines in small hub population make it more likely that they will go extinct, and the situation is further worsened by reduction of genetic variability in subpopulation. That's the result from the process of fragmentation, that is isolation. Moreover, we know that species with already restricted ranges are particularly vulnerable to these particular threats. If you look into some of the study and some of the report, like for example, United Nations which report that was in 1990s, they said in that different report they mentioned that most clearing of tropical forests, about 70% of clearing of tropical forests did occurs to make way of agriculture, including livestock grazing. Many rainforest organisms, like especially the endemic species that lives only in limited areas of forest, because in that limited area, these endemic species are very unique species. As you know, they are limited to in specific areas of a forest of a region that meet their peculiar needs for temperature, water and food, and you will not find that particular characteristic, that environment which they need for their survival nowhere else. So when you cut those areas like rainforest, then if you burn down those areas, then automatically those organisms will be lost. For example, in IUCN Red List in 2006, you will find out that forest clearing for crops and livestock is a threat to more than 20% of terrestrial species. It was reported in that report. We the humans have been moving that species around the world, that we are taking a species one place to another and introducing them into new environments for millennia, carrying with them their plants, seeds and domesticated animals, as well as pests and microbes that cause epidemic disease. But if you look into the numbers and geographic extent of those species introduction, those species that is introduced that have increased exponentially, especially in these modern times, along with greatly expanded travel and threat, especially in this era of globalization. So most of these transported organisms, as sometimes we call as invasive alien species, that is transported that organism, either they are accidentally arrive accidentally or hitchhikers. For example, it may comes in the clothing, it may be in the tires, used tires, it may be in the woolen pallets or in the ballast of water or of ships, or are deliberately introduced. These do not create problems in their new environments because they are able to survive. But if you introduce species, then they become invasive, then those introduced species disrupt the ecosystem and threatening the survival of other species. Sometimes they drive away those native species to extinction. So some of the invasive species, including some insects, seems to be thrived particularly well in already degraded environment. So after habitat destruction, the issue of invasive alien species, this is thought to be the greatest current threat to biodiversity. If you look into the way the invasive species or invasive alien species is threatening to the natural habitat, you can we see that it can transform the structure and species composition of an ecosystem or different ecosystem by repressing or excluding native species, because invasive species are often one of a whole the suite of factors affecting particular site or that particular ecosystem. So introduction of exotic species by man also results in the habitat degradation and thereby leading to loss of native species. Some of the prominent examples are the spread of the Peruvian thorny tree that is scientifically Prosopis juliflora in the dry parts of northern India, where it replaces the native species such as bubble tree, that is Acacia nilotica, and the spread of South American flowering bush, than Lantana camera in the sub-Himalayan belt. These are examples. And again, if you look into that aquatic, semi-aquatic ecosystem, There also the aquatic and semi-aquatic species, their decline, that habitat has declined, means the quality of their habitat has declined due to diversion of ground and surface water, resulting in the drying up of streams and other water bodies. Then from siltation and pollution from pesticide and other chemical. So in that way, when the quality of habitat is declining or degrading, then freshwater fish are also threatened by the introduction of exotic species which may be predator or competitors. Again, when we destruct their habitat, there is a shortage of food for wild animals in wildlife sanctuaries also and national parks. So even we have in the protected areas like wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, when there is shortage of food, then the animals move out of the sanctuaries and national parks in search of food and cause huge damage to the crop fields of the surrounding areas. Then the farmers get a revenge pull and kill the wild animals. When there is a disruption in the migratory routes of wild animals, like sometimes that herd of the elephant move from one place to another, and sometimes due to their movements, or their movement is due to the development of human settlements, then the migratory animal attack the settlement in their route. On the other hand, you will find out that most of the time the government does not pay sufficient compensation for the damage caused by the wild animals to the farmers' crop. So the agonized farmers then started killing the wild animals. So this is how animal conflicts happen. So my point is that whatever activities we have done, that created another scenario, human-wildlife conflicts. So what we can say that whatever the major causes of loss of biodiversity are, I repeat again, because of the loss in habitat on land, in the ocean, in freshwater, overexploitation, introduction of species, means invasive species, then because of infectious diseases, pollution, what we discussed about ultraviolet radiation, then nowadays because of the socio-political issues of war and conflict, and at last global climate change. Then the question comes, why biodiversity loss is concerned? Human society completely depend on ecological system, right? Most of us agree that, because most of the fundamental need of life, including the constant supply of oxygen, water, and food, these we are getting from the ecological system. At the same time, the proper functioning of those ecological system, biodiversity is critically important. So when there is loss of biodiversity, it often reduces the productivity of ecosystem, thereby shrinking nature's basket of goods and services from which we constantly draw. Threatens our food supplies, opportunities for recreation and tourism, and source of wood, medicine, and energy, and so on. Destabilizes ecosystem and weakens their ability to deal with natural disasters such as floods, droughts, and hurricanes, and with human-caused stresses such as pollution and climate change. In the same time, when there is biodiversity loss, if we look into the function of ecosystem or ecosystem that health, this loss of biodiversity disrupts ecosystem function, making ecosystem more vulnerable to shocks and disturbances, and ecosystem has become less resilient and less able to supply humans with needed services. For example, wherever you see the protected wetland habitats, when it has been lost or degraded, the damage to coastal communities from floods and storm increase dramatically, since the natural protection offered by this ecosystem against wave action, tidal surge, water runoff from land is compromised. So you will see the best example in recent different natural disaster phenomenal what we have seen in reality recently, like different cyclone in Indian subcontinent. Again, if you look into the social structure in human society, the consequences of biodiversity loss in the ecosystem disruption are often harshest for the rural poor because they depend most immediately upon local ecosystem services for their livelihoods and who are often the least able to access or afford substitutes when this becomes degraded. In their daily life, they are in rural household, they depend to varying degrees, starting for farming, fishing, hunting, and the harvest of wild product to help meet their subsistence and monetary needs, while in the same time complementing this environmental income with outside source of earning such as wage labor. So biodiversity loss poses a significant barrier to meeting the needs of the world's poorest. So the loss of biodiversity is also increasingly recognized as a significant risk factor in business development as well, and a threat to long-term economic sustainability of a nation. The reduction in biodiversity also hurt every one of us in different way. Like if you look into the cultural identity, our cultural identity is deeply rooted in our biological environment. You will see in the history, biodiversity has inspired many musicians, painters, sculptors, writers, and other artists all over the world. Again, if you look into the creativity of the people, the biodiversity has directly or indirectly influenced and boosted the creativity of people. Plants and animals are often used as symbols. Preserves, we'll see these are preserved in flags, sculptures, and other images that define us and our society. Sometimes we draw inspiration just from looking at nature's beauty and power. And biodiversity is a great source of knowledge. While in the process of exploring pattern of biodiversity across the globe, many scientists indirectly or directly discover many secrets of nature, including the process of evolution of life on the earth. So the point is that loss of biodiversity implies that these precious benefits to the humanity will also be lost. Quite apart from nature's immediate usefulness to humankind, there are important additional reasons to care about loss of biodiversity. One of the that very well-known argument is that every life form has an intrinsic right to exist. Species alive today are thousands to millions of years old and have each traveled unique evolutionary paths, never to be repeated in order to reach their present form. So, it is unethical to drive other form of life to extinction and thereby deprive present and future generation of options for their survival and development. In fact, we must recognize the right of future generation to inherit, as we have, a planet thriving with life and that continues to afford opportunities to reap the economic, cultural, and spiritual benefit of nature. At the same time, we have seen the common perception, what is the common perception and reality behind the loss of biodiversity. As we know that depleting status of biodiversity is one of the major global concerns calling for immediate attention from the world community. On the basis of knowledge gained over the last few decades, it can be said that biodiversity loss is much more extensive than this commonly held perception. The time has come to focus public attention on a number of more obscure and to most people unpleasant truths, such as we have that assumption that the primary cause of the decay of organic diversity is direct human exploitation. No, it is not the not only direct human exploitation, but It is because of habitat destruction that inevitably result from the expansion of human population, human activities. These organisms, means biodiversity, have provided humanity with the very basis of our civilization in the form of crops, domestic animals, and a wide variety of industrial products and many important medicines. Nonetheless, the most important anthropocentric reason for preserving diversity is the role that microorganisms, plants, and animals play in providing free ecosystem services without which society in its present form could not persist. So, the loss of genetically distinct population within a species is at the moment at least as important a problem as the loss of an entire species. Once a species is reduced to a remnant, its ability to benefit humanity ordinarily declines greatly, and its total extinction in the relatively near future becomes much more likely. By the time an organism, when we recognize as an organism as endangered, it is often too late to save it. So, based on extrapolation of current trends by different authors, that in the reduction of diversity that implies downfall of our civilization within the next 100 years, that is comparable to a nuclear winter. On the same time, arresting the loss of biodiversity will be extremely difficult. The traditional way of just set aside a preserved approach is almost certain to be inadequate because of the factors such as human population is growing, pollution and climate change is induced by human beings. So, a quasi-religious transformation leading to the appreciation of diversity for its own sake, apart from the obvious direct benefits to humanity, may be required to save other organisms and ourselves. Again, if you look into the biodiversity loss and achieving SDGs by 2030, if you look into everybody agreed upon that achieving all these goals, like the Sustainable Development Goals, 7 goals, starting from your 8 Millennium Development Goals, and then extend up to 17 Sustainable Development Goals, then that entirely based on the biodiversity and ecosystem services. For example, if you look into the current scenario of biodiversity loss, it poses significant barrier to meeting different SDGs. Like if you know, goal number 1 that talk about end poverty, no hunger. No, without, it is the biodiversity that gives us what we are talking about. Hunger is directly related to your agrobiodiversity. Poverty is also directly related to the status of biodiversity in the surrounding. That's why when we are discussing about the loss of biodiversity's impact onto the poorest of the poor, when we talk about human well-being, it's also directly related to your health of the ecosystem. And when we talk about the education that we discussed, that we learn a number of hypotheses, the number of things when we started to explore biodiversity. So, biodiversity, ecosystem is a basis for education. So, in the same way, different goals are directly or indirectly related to conserving the biodiversity. When biodiversity is lost, it will be very difficult or without that difficult to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, or we can say our goals of sustainability. So, the wider role of ecosystem services, as you know, they support livelihoods and human well-being, that reveals that biodiversity is the foundation for all development and hence for meeting each of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? For example, again, I am giving an example of what we are talking about, goal number 1 and 2, we said that food security and nutrition security. This is the importance of agricultural biodiversity to the elimination of your hunger and malnutrition. Like goal number 3, in terms of human health, the role of biodiversity should be recognized, or it's recognized as controlling vector-based diseases and providing the natural sources of many traditional medicines and modern pharmaceutical drugs. So that's what we have discussed today is on the major reason and causes of loss of biodiversity, why we need to conserve the biodiversity, and what I want to say is, from this discussion what we can say is that health of biodiversity is the foundation of achieving sustainability or achieving sustainable development goals by 2030 and beyond. So we must try in our best level with this knowledge that how to minimize all these causes of biodiversity loss. Thank you very much.